Sophia had heard it all her life, how she was the spitting image of her mother, Eleanor. From the curve of her smile to the way she carried herself, the resemblance was uncanny. But she never thought it would lead to something like this. It started on a night that felt ordinary. Her best friend had dragged her to an upscale gathering, promising an evening of fun and maybe a little adventure. The mansion was grand, filled with people who exuded wealth and influence. Sophia wasn't particularly interested, but then she noticed him. Richard. The moment their eyes met, his expression shifted: shock, disbelief, something deeper, something almost painful. He walked toward her slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. When he spoke, his voice trembled. "Eleanor?" Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "Excuse me?" He blinked, as if snapping out of a dream. But there was something in his eyes, an emotion so raw it made her shiver. "You look just like her." A part of her wanted to walk away, but curiosity anchored her to the spot. Richard introduced himself, and despite his composed demeanor, he seemed shaken. He asked to speak with her privately. Against her better judgment, she agreed. In the quiet of the terrace, under the dim glow of city lights, he spoke of a love long lost. "I knew your mother, Eleanor. We were once close." Sophia had never heard her mother speak of Richard, yet his words carried a depth of emotion that couldn't be faked. He described Eleanor in ways no one ever had. Her laughter, the way she tilted her head when deep in thought, how she once dreamed of escaping to a faraway place. It was strange hearing about her mother not as mom, but as a woman with a past, a heart, desires. "She was everything to me," Richard murmured. "And then one day, she was gone." Sophia's chest tightened. "She never mentioned you." A shadow crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "I suppose some loves are meant to stay in the past." Yet, the way he looked at her, the intensity of it, made Sophia uneasy. It wasn't just admiration. It was something else. As the night went on, Richard stayed close, offering her small, careful touches, a guiding hand on her back, fingers brushing against hers. He spoke to her like he had known her forever. Sophia felt a strange pull toward him, like being drawn into a story she hadn't known she was part of. The resemblance to her mother had clearly unsettled him, yet there was something in the way he spoke, the way he held her gaze, that made her stomach flutter. When the night ended, Richard didn't say goodbye like a stranger would. He took her hand in his, held it just a moment too long, and whispered, "I never thought I'd see her again. And yet here you are." Sophia walked away that night with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answers to. Sophia told herself it was nothing, a fleeting moment, a trick of nostalgia playing on Richard's mind. But as the days passed, she found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. Then he called. His voice was warm, inviting. "Let me take you somewhere." Just as friends. She hesitated, but curiosity won. That evening, Richard picked her up in a sleek black car, taking her to an intimate restaurant with dim lighting and soft music. The conversation flowed effortlessly. He spoke of art, travel, and the things Eleanor once loved. Sophia laughed at his stories, but a part of her wondered, was he seeing her, or was he seeing Eleanor? As weeks passed, their meetings became frequent. Richard took her to places her mother once visited, shared memories as if passing down pieces of a life Sophia had never known. The lines blurred between past and present. She wanted to believe he cared for her, but something gnawed at her. One evening, as they sat by a rooftop fire pit, Richard reached for her hand. "It's strange," he said, staring at her fingers entwined with his. "It feels like no time has passed. Like I have her back." Sophia stiffened. "Her?" He looked up, his expression unreadable. "You remind me so much of her." She pulled her hand away, suddenly uneasy. But before she could say anything, he smiled. "Forgive me. Sometimes the past sneaks up on me." She wanted to believe him, wanted to ignore the warning bells in her mind. But the more time she spent with Richard, the more she felt trapped between being herself and being Eleanor's reflection. The moment that shattered her illusions came unexpectedly. One evening, as they sat on his balcony, watching the city lights, he whispered, "Eleanor, I—" The name hung in the air like a blade. Sophia pulled away, heart pounding. "What did you just call me?" Richard's face paled. "Sophia, I—" She stood up, stepping back. "This isn't about me, is it? You don't see me. You see her." He reached for her, desperation in his eyes. "No, I—" But she had already turned away. Her mind raced. How had she let herself fall into this? How had she ignored the signs? That night, she searched through old belongings, looking for any mention of Richard in Eleanor's past. And then she found them, letters, hidden in an old jewelry box. Letters from Richard, professing love, devotion, and heartbreak. The last letter chilled her to the bone. "If you leave, Eleanor, I will never forgive you. You are mine. Always." Sophia's breath came in short gasps. This wasn't just an old love story. This was something much darker. Sophia's hands trembled as she held the old letters. The words were filled with passion, but underneath, there was something unsettling. Possession, desperation. Her mother had never spoken of Richard, and now she understood why. The next day, she confronted him. His face remained calm as she held out the letters. "You planned this, didn't you?" Richard sighed, rubbing his temple. "I didn't plan anything, Sophia. Fate brought us together." "Fate?" Her voice shook. "You sought me out. You called me by her name. Tell me the truth." He hesitated, then met her eyes. "Yes. I looked for you. I saw your picture once, and it was like seeing Eleanor again." A cold wave washed over her. "So, this was never about me." Richard stepped closer. "At first, maybe. But then I got to know you, and—" She backed away. "And what? You fell in love with the version of my mother you created in your mind." His face twisted in frustration. "You don't understand. Eleanor and we were meant to be. She chose your father, but I never stopped loving her. When I saw you, I thought that you could bring her back," she finished, her voice hollow. Richard's hands clenched. "You are her blood, her spirit. In a way, you are her." Sophia's stomach churned. "I'm not Eleanor." He exhaled sharply, his gaze darkening. "You don't know how much I loved her. How much I still love her." She took another step back, her pulse hammering. "You don't love me. You love a ghost." He reached out, but she recoiled. "Don't do this," he murmured. "We can still—" No, her voice was firm now. "This isn't love. It's obsession." The silence between them was heavy, charged with the weight of unspoken truths. Richard's expression flickered between anger and sorrow, but Sophia knew she couldn't stay. Turning on her heel, she walked away, heart pounding. He didn't call after her. He didn't try to stop her. But as she stepped into the night, she felt his gaze lingering like a shadow she couldn't shake. Sophia didn't look back. She blocked Richard's number, erased every trace of him from her life, but the weight of what had happened lingered. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was the realization that she had never been loved for who she was. Days passed, then weeks. She avoided questions from her best friend, unable to put her emotions into words. How did she explain that she had fallen for a man who never truly saw her? That every touch, every whispered word had been meant for someone else? She spent hours rereading her mother's letters, searching for answers. And then, buried in the bottom of the box, she found the final note Eleanor had written, but never sent. "Richard, I loved you once, but love cannot be ownership. I chose my path, and I hope one day you will understand that it was never about leaving you. It was about finding myself." Tears blurred Sophia's vision. Her mother had broken free, and now it was her turn. Slowly, she began reclaiming herself. She visited places she loved, not ones Richard had chosen. She started journaling, rediscovering the dreams she had put aside. Then one evening, she met Daniel. He wasn't like Richard. There were no grand gestures, no intense proclamations of love. Just kindness, honesty, the simple comfort of being seen for who she was. One night, As they walked through a quiet street, Daniel turned to her. "You seem lighter than when we first met." She smiled. "I think I finally let go of something I was never meant to hold." He took her hand, no hesitation, no expectations. Just warmth. For the first time in months, she felt whole. Not as Eleanor's daughter. Not as a reflection of someone else's love. Just Sophia. And that was enough.